Karl Marx, that thinker everyone associates with economics and politics, had a secret and fascinating side: his relationship with art. And it was not a simple relationship. It oscillated between passionate admiration and ruthless criticism, like someone who both loves and hates a movie at the same time. The curious thing is that Marx, so severe with social structure and power, melted before certain literary works. However, every time he praised an author, he seemed to immediately scold himself for being seduced. It was as if he lived an internal battle between the relentless philosopher and the sensitive spectator. That tension makes his artistic gaze even today both disconcerting and almost cinematic, like a critic who forgives not even his own emotional weaknesses before the beautiful or the sublime. Let's think about William Shakespeare. For Marx, the English playwright was a titan. He referred to him as a universal genius, capable of exposing human passions in their rawest form. And yet, every time he praised him, he subordinated him to his theory. Art had to reflect the material conditions of life, not just beauty. Imagine someone watching a movie they love and asking themselves, but does this reflect the social truth of its time, or just entertain? That was Marx with Shakespeare. He admired him, but at the same time demanded historical justification, an economic backdrop. That demand made his praises never pure devotion, but rather a constant duel between emotion and analytical reason. Another interesting example is his reaction to the modern poets of his time. He often called them superficial, accusing them of building false worlds that anesthetized the people. For Marx, empty poetry was like a mild drug, designed to distract the masses from real social pain. And yet, in his youth, he had written verses full of romantic, almost melancholic passion. Contradiction? Exactly. Young Marx wrote as if seeking refuge in lyrical art, but adult Marx destroyed it, labeling it evasive. That contradiction, so human, shows us that he did not speak from the coldness of a scientist, but from the conflict of a frustrated creator who understood that art could be at once balm and chains. His relationship with painting was no less ambiguous. Marx adored realism, those works that showed workers, streets, faces marked by life. Paintings that reflected exaggerated luxury or mythological scenes repelled him. For him, each brushstroke had to serve as a social mirror. Imagine entering a gallery with political eyes. Each work is not only composition and color, but testimony of power, wealth, or inequality. That's what Marx did. He saw in visual art not evasion, but a documentary record of society. And that perspective makes him almost a forerunner of contemporary cultural criticism, the one who unmasks what lies behind every image that seems innocent. What's incredible is that Marx did not propose the total rejection of aesthetic enjoyment. On the contrary, he considered that art could elevate the human experience. But there was always a but. If the work did not expose the contradictions of its time, if it remained trapped on the surface, then for him it was an empty luxury. His judgment is very much like that of a modern spectator who values cinema not only for visual effects, but for its ability to tell uncomfortable and real stories. Thus, Marx seemed ahead of the sensitivity that seeks intellectual impact and not just aesthetic beauty. His love for art was always watched through a critical magnifying glass that turned admiration into an almost surgical analysis. A fascinating point is that Marx never declared himself an enemy of art, as some tend to think. Rather, he considered it a human treasure, though conditioned. He believed that art was a reflection of the economic structures that produced it. He said, for example, that Greek tragedies were born of a slave society, and without that context they could never have existed. From there comes his idea that art is historical, never eternal in itself, but tied to a specific social moment. Does this mean he denied its value? Quite the opposite. Its value was precisely that capacity to open a window into past worlds, into societies that no longer exist but left scars in cultural memory. In his personal correspondence, we find surprising confessions. Between economic discussions with Engels, Marx left space to recommend novels, comment on plays, or even criticize literary trends fashionable in Paris and London. He seemed like an undercover critic, hidden in the figure of the revolutionary philosopher. These letters reveal a more intimate Marx, who could be indignant at a poorly written book just as much as exhilarated by a brilliant author. Most striking is how his tone transformed. He was caustic, ironic, even theatrical. It was as if he donned the mask of a biting film critic who forgives no script error. That private Marx, sharp and sarcastic, is the one who reveals his most vivid artistic facet. Many wonder how Marx could be so harsh and at the same time so sensitive. Part of the answer lies in his own biography. He lived in poverty, surrounded by illnesses, family losses, and constant political persecution. That difficult life made him a demanding spectator. For him, art could not be an ornament. It needed meaning, it needed to denounce, it needed to push for change. That is why he did not tolerate what he considered superficial. And perhaps for that reason, when he found an honest work, his enthusiasm was real. He was like a thirsty man finding pure water in a desert full of mirages. His artistic gaze was marked by vital necessity, not by aesthetic comfort. Marx also approached cinema, but only indirectly, since he died before the rise of this art. However, his way of analyzing literature and painting seems to anticipate how he would view a film. He might have thought that editing, cameras, lights, and music should always serve to expose the injustices of his time. Imagine what he would say about a blockbuster that explained nothing about the real world. He would probably destroy it mercilessly. On the other hand, a social film, with sharp dialogues and characters reflecting real contradictions, would surely win him over. That ability to project his critiques into the future makes Marx a ghost critic of the cinema he never knew. The intriguing thing is that he never renounced emotion. When he spoke of the Greek classics, he could write with almost poetic enthusiasm. He admired how those authors, even in societies primitive compared to his era, achieved artistic power that transcended the slavery that sustained them. It was a poisoned praise, a tribute full of contradictions. And that contradiction is the key. Marx was not content to adore, he also needed to question. A spectator might do the same when watching a brilliant movie, knowing that labor exploitation was behind it. He loves the work, condemns the system. That double reaction is what makes Marx an uncomfortable critic, an admirer who never fully surrenders to emotional abandon. Another curious fact is how Marx saw popular literature. He sometimes liked it, but accused it of being contaminated by the market. He said that many writers wrote with selling in mind, not expressing truths. Here he anticipates the idea of art as cultural industry. He saw this phenomenon as a danger. Artists turned into merchants, books into products, ideas into commodities. That analysis sounds so current that it seems almost written to describe today's streaming platforms. For Marx, the great betrayal of art was to become part of the mechanism of consumption. And yet, that critique only proves he paid close attention and valued art too much to tolerate seeing it reduced to mere business. Marx's critiques even questioned the very idea of pure art. Art for art's sake? For him, it did not exist. Everything was crossed by history, politics, economics. There was no isolated creation, because the artist himself was shaped by context. This does not mean he denied inspiration or individual genius, but he understood them as inseparable from their time. Thus, a poem, a novel, or a painting were always social documents, even if their authors denied it. The discourse of art as neutrality seemed to him a mask, and Marx tore it off with fury. That mistrust of the concept of artistic purity made him a relentless critic, but also an admirer with historical antennae. The most paradoxical thing is that while writing economic treatises, Marx never stopped surrounding himself with literature. His daughters, whom he adored, grew up reading novels, reciting verses, and attending theater. That domestic life, filled with books, reveals that in his home, art was as important as politics. It was as if, in private, Marx allowed himself to be a devoted spectator, while in public he unleashed his severe critique. That distance between the private and the political makes his relationship with art even more dramatic, worthy of a family film full of tension. There we see a Marx teaching his daughters to read with passion, but also instilling in them the idea that no work is innocent. If we put all these pieces together, we see that Marx was both a demanding critic and a passionate admirer. He loved art, but loved it as someone who loves with suspicion, examining every gesture, every word, every stroke. His relationship with Shakespeare, his disdain for superficial literature, his charm with pictorial realism, his historical vision of Greek tragedy, all form a complex, almost cinematic portrait. He was not the naive spectator who lets himself be carried away, but the restless mind who enjoys while questioning. That duality, that guarded love, makes approaching Marx like watching a critic fighting with himself in every scene. A man for whom art was pleasure, but never innocent pleasure.